Hey, welcome back to Coffee with Scott. As always, pull up a chair, grab a cup of coffee, grab your Bible, grab your pen, and today let's dig into our weekly devotional. So today we're going to be in Ephesians chapter 6. We're going to look at three verses beginning at verse 10. Going to be reading from the NET Bible. And I think that this passage speaks directly to something that maybe many of us feel but struggle to name. And that would be the exhaustion that comes from unseen battles. So we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get into our devotional today. But let's start, as I said, Ephesians chapter 6, and let's start at verse 10. And it says, "Finally, be strengthened in the Lord and in the strength of his power. Clothe yourselves with the full armor of God, so that you'll be able to stand against the schemes of the devil. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the powers, against the world rulers of this darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavens. For this reason, take up the full armor of God, so that you may be able to stand your ground on the evil day. And having done everything to stand." Now let's just go to the first part of verse 14. Stand firm therefore. So Paul begins with a simple but crucial instruction. Paul says, "Be strengthened in the Lord and the strength of his power." Notice that Paul does not say, or what Paul does not say. He does not say, try harder. He does not say, dig deep within yourself. He says, be strengthened, which implies, and listen to this, understand this clearly. He says, be strengthened, which implies receiving, not achieving. So many of us get tired because we're trying to fight spiritual battles with emotional energy, or we're trying to fight these spiritual battles with willpower or personality strength. But Paul reminds us, listen, Paul reminds us that the, that the strength we need is borrowed strength. Paul says the strength of his power, not ours. The strength, the power of Yeshua, the power of our Creator. And this is something that we need to remind ourselves of daily. It's not my strength, it's not your strength, but it is His strength. Paul goes on to say, our struggle is not against flesh and blood. And so many times, and well, for me, from time to time, and maybe for you also, we need reminding of this also. And let me just say what Paul says again. Our struggle, our struggle is not against flesh and blood. And now that's a hard truth, because when we're in the battle, it can feel like the battle is with people. Could be a difficult co-worker. It could be a strained relationship. It could even be a hurtful conversation. It could be a misunderstanding that won't seem to go away. But Paul pulls back the curtain and says, there's more happening here than what you can see. When we fight people as the enemy, we end up exhausted, bitter, and divided. Let me say that one more time. When we fight people as the enemy, we end up exhausted, bitter, and divided. When we recognize the spiritual nature of the conflict, then we can respond with wisdom instead of reaction. And many times, I think that when we're in these battles, a lot of times nobody even knows that we're going or we're facing a battle or a struggle. And that's why I said these silent battles, because we don't let anybody know that we're struggling sometimes or having difficult sometimes. So this is why we must recognize the spiritual nature of the conflict, and we can respond with wisdom instead of reaction. This is the point I was fixing to make and lost my train of thought. I apologize. But when we have the mindset that we're fighting against people, I think many times we react, and so that's where the bitterness can creep in, or the division could creep in. So we have to understand, and I'm going to say this one more time: it is not against flesh and blood. If we go, let's look at verse 11, because I like how Paul says this: clothe yourself with the full armor of God. That clothe yourself. To me, I'm going to use this phrase. It hits a little different than some versions are going to say put on. I like the clothe yourself with the full armor of God so that you'll be able to stand against the schemes of the devil. The word that Paul uses here implies craftiness, strategy, uh, maybe even slow deception. Many times, spiritual battles aren't dramatic, but they're subtle. Things kind of creep up on us, or we find our place in a situation or a circumstance that we didn't realize we were headed that direction until it's too late, or because it just happened slowly. We have to remember that our enemy is, let me say it this way, our enemy is crafty and he's sneaky. And so these attacks that we can find ourselves in are, as I just said, they're not dramatic. They're not boom, and we find ourselves in the middle of a battle. But it's kind of they can be, like I said, this slow process. An example would be discouragement that creeps in quietly, compromise that feels small at first, isolation disguised as needing some space, doubt that whispers this isn't working. These are just little subtle things that that enemy can implant in our mind, that this person doesn't like me, or this the people don't want me at this congregation or attending this church, or um, a little bit won't hurt. I can participate just a little bit in this or a little bit of that, and it's not going to hurt. Um, to hurt you. It's kind of like somebody coming in when you're sleeping and moving a boundary marker, maybe creeping inch by inch on your property line. Because I'm talking figuratively, or you know, just moving this boundary marker until before you know it, they've consumed almost all of your property, or maybe they consumed all of your property just subtly, little inch by inch. But let's move on. So that's why Paul emphasizes standing and not charging. So we're not reacting, but we are standing. We're not charging. We're not being driven by our emotions. And so sometimes victory doesn't look like a forward movement. Let me say that again. Sometimes victory doesn't look like forward movement. It looks like refusing to be moved. Let me say that part again. It looks like refusing to be moved. So when the battle comes, when the battle comes, we're not reacting with our emotions, but we've got enough wisdom to know this is an attack of the enemy. It's not an attack by an individual. It's a spiritual battle, and so we've got to have that His strength, the power of His strength, that no matter how hard the wind blows, I'm not moving. No matter how many times the enemy comes in, I'm not moving. Standing is an act of faith. Paul repeats one word several times: stand. So that you may be able to stand your ground. And having done everything to stand. What does it say here in verse 13? For this reason, take up the full armor of God so that you may be able to stand your ground on the evil day, and having done everything to stand. Verse 14 says, stand firm therefore. This is powerful. Paul doesn't say after you've won. He says after you've done everything you know to do, stand. Stand. Standing means you've prayed and you're still waiting. You've obeyed and the situation hasn't changed yet. You trusted God even though the pressure is still there. Standing is not passive. It's faith with its feet planted firmly on God's promises. And while we're talking about God's promises, our last two weekly devotionals have been just that. They have been based on the promises of God. The one we done last week, Psalm 23, the Lord shepherds me. Shepherds me. Go back and watch that one and hear those promises. The one we done the week before, Jesus in the boat in the storm, He'll never leave us. Never leave us. Never leave us. That one from last week, Psalms 23 says, when I'm in the midst, I believe that's the way the Septuagint said it, when I'm in the midst of the valley, you're with me. So remember, you're standing by the power of His strength. If we're standing in the power of His strength, can't be moved. But if we're standing in the power of our strength, you're going to be moved. You're going to be moved. let's move on. So it's important. It's important. We have to ask ourselves this question because look at that. Paul is talking about standing. He says, clothe yourself. One of the first things he says is clothe yourself with the whole armor of God. Why does this matter? Before the battle starts, before the fight starts, we have to clothe ourselves in God's armor. The armor must be put on before the battle intensifies. So let me say it this way: the armor is put on before the battle intensifies. This tells us something important. Spiritual preparation isn't reactionary, it's daily, it's intentional. You don't put on armor once you've already been wounded. You don't wait until you're in the battle. You don't wait until you're in the battle to put on the armor. You put on the armor first because there's a chance, there's a thought, maybe I might be wounded. So let me put this armor on now, just in case. So that's the reason for armor. Is a soldier put on armor because he didn't want to lose an arm, he didn't want to lose a leg, he didn't want to be injured. So he put the armor on first. And Paul says, clothe yourself with the whole armor of God. So let me leave you with this. If you feel like you're just barely standing today, you're not failing, you're obeying. Because you are standing. You are standing. Standing in faith is sometimes the bravest thing that you or I can do. You don't have to overpower the darkness. You don't have to figure out every strategy. You don't have to win the battle in your own strength. You just have to stand in the Lord and in the strength of His power. Keep standing. Keep standing. And after you've done everything that you can do, keep standing in the power and the strength of His power. Thank you for spending this time, this devotional with Coffee with Scott. And as always, I ask that if you found this video useful, helped you in any way, please like the video. If you're not subscribed, subscribe to the channel. Hit that notification bell. And if you know somebody that might be struggling, share the video with them. It's free. It helps us out. Thank you for your time. Thank you for coming to the table. I'll see you next time at Coffee with Scott at Covenant Cafe.